week on Quadriga, Mali intervention, a high-risk mission. France surprised the international community last week with a sudden launch of airstrikes against Islamist rebels in its former West African colony. The move reflects fears that the rebels, who are linked to al-Qaeda, threaten the security of Europe as well as Mali. Paris appears to be digging in for the long haul. It has promised to stay until the country is safe again. But just how long could that take? Your host today, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. If French President Hollande might have thought that the euro crisis will be his biggest challenge and obstacle in 2013, well, he might have to rethink again, because France now is in the conflict, very much involved in Mali. And for how much longer? That's what we're going to talk about on today's show, together with my three guests. Welcome to Cornelius Vogt, who's with the German Council on Foreign Relations, where he's an expert on foreign, security and defense policy. Daniel Gerlach is the editor-in-chief of Zenith, a German-language magazine on the Middle East, Africa and the Muslim world. And Charlotte Wiedemann is a seasoned print journalist who reports mainly on Africa and Islamic societies. She's recently returned from reporting in Mali. Welcome to you all. Charlotte Wiedemann, the euro crisis, the US election, Syria. We have a lot of issues, but it's Mali now that's very much on the agenda of the international community. Very much surprising to some who thought of Mali as a model democracy for more than 2 decades. Surprising to you as well?
Not that much. In fact, Mali has never been a model of democracy. Quite opposite, I would say that the core of the conflict, of the crisis now, is the failure of a Western-style democracy in Africa. And the core of the crisis is not a failed state. I think this is a very important difference, because Malian people have a very strong sense of nationhood. They have a very strong feeling of being a nation. And also they have, I think, 4 points. They agree on the 4 most important points. That is longing for a democratic state, which is, of course, a multi-ethnical state, and which is a secular state on a unified territory.
And we will talk more about the aspirations of the people in Mali in a little bit. But Daniel Gerlach, you've lived in France for many years. Here's France. Here's Hollande taking this bold decision to send French troops into Mali. A wise move?
Well, polls show that the intervention in Mali is extremely popular. I think 2/3 of the French population that have been asked recently by pollsters agreed. They reacted very positive to this step. Well, there is very, very little political opposition at the moment, and even the French Prime Minister kind of made a very positive remark on the political backing and solidarity even of the different parties in France. And there's just a few voices like Dominique de Villepin who said that this is a mistake, and that France had made this mistake before. But this man eventually is just a very self-important and self-advertising political voice with no relevance in France. I think Mali as a country is extremely popular in France. Every travel agency in Paris would have sold you trips to Mali, whereas Germans would have difficulties to find Mali on the map. The French traveled there. There's about 7,000 French nationals in Mali. So after all, the French cannot do differently but getting involved. And on the other hand, I think they get it for a very good price. They might get a military success for a good price. And if you look at other problems like, Syria, a huge headache for everybody. Why don't we go there? Why don't we intervene there? Why don't the French do it? Basically, I think they do it in Mali because they can.
Cornelius Vogt, Daniel Gerlach says the French might get the military victory for a good price, as he said. Would you agree? Because at the end of the day, it seems to me that the troops in northern Mali by the rebels have turned out to be much stronger than initially expected by the French,
Indeed. I think it's far too early to talk about military victory. And in the end, from a strategic point of view, what you're interested in as a political leader, as Hollande, is not military victory, but you need a political solution that in the end will lead to some kind of a stable, non-violent environment in Mali. And considering the huge risks that are attached to this engagement there, not least because of the strength of the rebels as we see now, are huge, and it's far more into question whether this is going to be a successful military engagement for the French.
There are about 800 French troops right now in Mali. Talk is that the number will be increased by 2,500 ground troops. Do you think that'll be sufficient to get the job done?
We'll see whether that's sufficient, but I think one thing to consider is the sheer size of the territory that we're talking about. Northern Mali is roughly the size of France and Spain, or California and Texas combined. And I think you don't need to be a military expert to understand that 2,500 or 2,600 French troops and maybe an additional 3,300 ECOWAS troops may be not sufficient to control this territory. They may be sufficient to out and to dislodge the rebels, but are they able to control this territory? I'm highly doubtful.
Gerlach Wiedemann, Mali, of course, was colonial territory of France until 1960. Now, there are some people in Mali who might be somewhat critical of this Western intervention as well, no? Might stir some colonial, if you will, resentments and of the past?
I would say that, especially among Malian intellectuals, while there has always been kind of suspicion that France is taking the side of the Tuareg rebels, and that France has the interest to have a strong influence on this northern Mali territory for the purpose of exploiting the national resources like uranium, and also there might be oil. So I think we have to see that also among Malians there is not just one opinion. I mean, now we have people in the streets of the capital of Bamako who are cheering when they see the French troops. Yes, of course. I mean, they have suffered a lot during the last 12 months. And of course, they are really longing so for a change. But also, you have to see that people on the streets were also cheering partly when in March last year, the government was overthrown by a military coup, because also then people were hoping for a change, for a better democracy. So it's somehow easy to picture now, and in news reports, people cheering so for France. I mean, this is just a moment. And already there are doubts about what will be later, because some people fear now that France might dictate the lines of negotiation afterwards. And then again, the issue of the Tuareg secession movement comes up.
And indeed, Daniel Gerlach, there are some questions about the motivation on the part of France. Some people say, as Gerlach Wiedemann already mentioned, French mining uranium is mining uranium in Niger for many years. Mali also is very rich in uranium. Some people say that this intervention has an economic consideration. Francois Hollande was weak in the polls prior to this intervention. Now his numbers are going up. So is this a political move rather than a...
Well, first of all, you know, this is not a French intervention alone. This is an ECOWAS intervention. The neighboring African countries have asked, you know, even though there was disagreement, have asked the French to interfere. Well, the time and the way they interfere, okay, this is something else. Of course, it is up to the French. I mean, they represent the major military force to oust the rebels from
it's a French
Mali.
Intervention with African decoration, I should say.
I don't agree. I think there have been political talks before. The president of Burkina Faso, Blaise Compaoré, who's always like the power broker and, you know, the diplomatic champion in Western Africa, had put a lot of effort into this. There were political. I mean, you just mentioned that we need a political solution. What kind of political solution do you want? As long as if the requirements are to maintain the territorial integrity of Mali and to keep the state the way it is, well, there is no options for political negotiations, because there have been political negotiations which basically failed, and you wouldn't see who is your counterpart on the other side. So this, notwithstanding, of course, that the French have political interests everywhere in Western Africa, and I don't believe in this conspiracy theory that they're doing this because there is uranium in Mali. Because whatever government, whatever rulership is there in Mali, you can exploit the mines, and you can bring out the uranium if you want. We see other foreign nations like Qatar, the Emirate of Qatar, kind of gambling in northern Mali. We have a lot of questions, a lot of doubts what the Qataris are doing there, why their relationship with the Azawad movement, like the Tuareg movement, but also with Ansar ad-Din, the Islamist movement, are so close and so intense. There is always space for a lot of conspiracy theories and the cui bono question, like who does it, whose interest does it serve? I agree. The French wouldn't have done it, and Francois Hollande wouldn't have done it if he thought that this would play negatively on his reputation and his popularity. But I don't think this is the only reason.
Cornelius Vogt, Daniel Gerlach says this is not just a French intervention. Quite on the contrary, they're just supporting ECOWAS. Gerlach Wiedemann says, no, it is a French intervention with African decoration. Which one is it?
I think we've seen a lot of media reports that report about a sudden French intervention. My personal judgment is it might have been sudden, but anything but surprising. I do not think that it is only up to conspiracy theories to point to the hard French economic interests. Maybe not so much in Mali, I'd say, but definitely, most definitely in Niger. I mean, you could say, well, it's 1,000 kilometers off the Malian Niger border. However, I think everyone understands that if northern Mali or the entire country of Mali turns into some kind of terrorist supporting regime, some kind of an Islamist territory, that also French economic interests in Niger are threatened.
But it could destabilize
and therefore,
the whole region.
I'm not surprised that the French are the ones who step in now.
It could destabilize the whole region. Before security was a business. The ECOWAS countries, especially Burkina Faso, but also Mali, would get a lot of funds from America, from Europe, in order to set up their security forces and prevent the spread of Islam, of militant Islamism in the region. So that hasn't worked because it was a business. It wasn't the task wasn't really taken care of in a serious way. And now the ECOWAS countries, many of the ECOWAS countries see that this represents a potential danger for themselves. Not that the Malian Ansar ad-Din would conquer Western Africa. They're a tiny group. But that Boko Haram, for example, which is the militant Islamist movement, extremely aggressive movement in Nigeria, could gain power by this way. So I think it is a serious issue for ECOWAS, and it's not just a pretext for a neo-colonial intervention or whatever.
And indeed, Gerlach Wiedemann, there are some people who are saying that allowing an African state taken over by a jihadist group such as Ansar al-Din sends indeed the very wrong message to countries in the region, from Senegal to Nigeria. What would you say?
There is no substantial likelihood that the whole Mali, so the capital of Bamako, would have been overtaken by the Islamists without the French intervention. I mean, this is just a claim, a French claim. But if you look on the map and if you see that Bamako is a city of 2 million people, this is a very different stuff from northern Mali, where you have only 10% of Malian population on this vast territory. But how could the Islamist forces, which are comprised of about 2,000 people, how could they occupy the whole country, including the capital of 2 million people? If they had ever attempted to do this, this would have been a huge massacre. Because for sure, Malian people would not have been prepared to receive Islamists in the capital. And so I think the attack, which has obviously triggered the French intervention, just aimed on occupying the airport in central Mali, in this town of Sévaré. And now we see that, okay, France intervened to prevent this occupation of the airport. But then now they are going on, and they are really leading the war to the north. And I think nobody really knows what is the objective of this war. Because as Mr. Vogt said, this is a vast territory. And the only logical outcome of this French intervention can be that the terrorists are driven back to the desert where they have been already for more than 7 years. I mean, the presence of Al-Qaeda and other Islamist groups is not at all new in this area.
Cornelius Vogt, very much critical of the French intervention, Gerlach Wiedemann. But would you agree that the fear of the terrorists and the Islamists are artificially enhanced and overblown by Paris?
I agree that it is speculative to state that the rebels would have been militarily able to take over Bamako and to dislodge the government there. It most definitely would have been a far more difficult task than trying to control or at least oust the Malian forces out of northern Mali. It would have been far more difficult. Whether it is completely sort of like a theory invented by the French to legitimate this intervention that we see now, I think that's not the decisive point. Even if the government in Bamako would not have been threatened directly, and we know that it takes more than 400 kilometers from the front to Bamako.
800. Mm-hmm.
And it's not only the distance, but it's also a territory, and the streets are not comparable to what we know in Europe or elsewhere. So it would have been far more difficult. However, I think there's already good reason to do something against this rebel reign in northern Mali. That itself is, I think, a task for not only the French but the international community to take over and to produce a new environment of security in northern Mali, and to reinstate the rule of the Malian government, that is the government that is in Bamako, in northern Mali as well. I think the international community should not accept an Islamist rule in northern Mali.
And before we go on and talk more in detail about what's ahead in Mali and for the French in particular, let's have a quick look how it all started in this country, in one of the poorest countries in the world with barely 50 million people and a vast territory. Let's have a quick look at the backdrop of this conflict.
Islamist militants seized control of northern Mali last March, taking advantage of a coup by Tuareg rebels. The group set about imposing strict Sharia law, conducting floggings and amputations. They also destroyed World Heritage sites in Timbuktu, declaring the tombs idolatrous. As armed groups moved south, overrunning the town of Konna in central Mali, the government issued an urgent plea to France for help. Paris's intervention has sent West African military commanders scrambling to speed up their operations. The rebel bloc ECOWAS has long promised to send some 3,000 troops to Mali, but an actual date for the deployment was only set in December for the following September. Far too late for many. The UN recently put the number of refugees within Mali at 330,000 and rising.
Well, Gerlach Wiedemann, we just heard the numbers, 150,000 refugees, 200,000 further displaced inside the countries. The neighbors have shut down the borders, most of them anyway, in anticipation of this influx of refugees. Are we facing a humanitarian crisis, or are we already there?
Well, there is already, there has been a humanitarian crisis already for the last month. And many refugees inside the country were received by Malian families, which who very often don't have enough to eat by themselves. So there is already a humanitarian crisis. What we now see is that, again, people in the north are fleeing, and it's very difficult to flee out of the north to the south. So they flee to different, into different directions, which is partly into the desert. I think we also have to see that it's not that easy to say who is the enemy, who is friend and who is enemy. I mean, after almost 7 months of occupation and by Islamic occupants who have a lot of money, and you occupy a very poor population. So you can imagine they have recruited young men in particular. And there is, of course, also partly in a minority of the Malian population in the north, there is a kind of forced complicity, perhaps. So it will be very difficult now to say, well, who can safely stay and wait for the French liberators, and who should better flee? And already some people who have just some brighter skin fled because they are afraid to be taken so for Islamists later.
But just to get back to the point of the French intervention, we just saw in the report as well, the initial plea for the French to intervene came from the government, no? From the government in Mali.
Yes, I mean, it came from the president, who is a president without much legitimation, because he is not a democratically elected president. He is just on his post because of a decree of the Community of West African States, ECOWAS. And also he is a well-known person of the old political class, which was overthrown by the coup in last March. So the majority of Malians do not trust him very much. I mean, this was the state just before the intervention. Of course, always wars change the mood. But still, it's also well known, but not very much reported here, but more reported in the French media, that this president was fearing to be overthrown again. And so he more or less rescued also his own ass, if I may say this, by pleading the French to intervene.
While war changes the mood, says Gerlach Wiedemann, indeed the war changes the mood or has the potential to change the mood in Paris as well. There's some talk even that this could be potentially a new Afghanistan, or in the case of the French, a new Dien Bien Phu, sort of French troops not knowing what they're getting themselves into.
Well, the French soldiers have been to this part of the world for quite some time. I don't think that you can compare the strategic preconditions of a military intervention to Afghanistan or to, let's say, Somalia or Iraq. Actually, I think militarily, strategically, without being a soldier myself, I don't think that Mali is a big issue. If your aim and your target is just to, as the French Minister of Defense said, to basically eradicate the rebels. Because what does this mean? This means just like, to blow the hell out of them and to send, Mirage and Rafale fighters and probably drones, whatever. It actually means to kill them. And 6,000 people, 6,000 armed rebels would be a collateral damage in that intervention, a dreadful and cruel collateral damage. But I think it's a military objective which you can achieve. Well, later on for the political process, I have no idea how they're going to manage. But the French haven't started yesterday to deal with Mali. They haven't started yesterday to gather intelligence about this. Well, there has been talking about Sahelistan in Africa for quite a long time, which is, of course, due to the fact that Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, Al-Qaeda in Northern Africa was virulent and was very active in drug smuggling and hostage-taking and occasional terrorist attacks. I don't think that this is going to be another Afghanistan. I don't think that the strategic relevance of this part of the Sahel is so important to the international community, namely the United States, that this is going to be, that thousands of foreign soldiers are going to be sent there. And but yeah, I mean, you have a lot of destabilizing forces there. You have a lot of let's say success of Islamist groups there due to the lack of political alternatives and economic success.
And do you fear, as some people do now, that France has particularly become the target also on its own turf in France, a target of terrorists, of Islamist terrorists?
Let's say the good thing about France is that they are used to this. France had bomb attacks in their subways in the 1990s and occasionally again in the years of 2000. So the French are not. You cannot blackmail the French nation so easily by just putting a bomb in an underground station and say either you pull out of Mali or we'll go on with this. There have been abductions. There have been hostage crises. We see the situation in Algeria. There is I think 40 foreigners being held hostage in the eastern province of Algeria. Among them, I think, one French person. I think the Ansar ad-Din, or the Islamist rebels in Mali, have taken hostage so far 8 French nationals. So you don't blackmail France that easily. And I think, it's probably something that's difficult for us Germans to understand because we have a completely different mentality when it comes to foreign intervention. I don't want to know how the Germans would react to a similar situation. But I don't know. I'm not afraid for the French to that respect.
And since you mentioned Germany, Cornelius Vogt, of course, Germany was very much criticized in the aftermath of the Libya intervention, namely that it withdrew its support as it was perceived by some, particularly on the part of the West European allies. What's Germany's role here? Germany is very much keen on making the Libya experience forget, no?
I'm not so sure about that, but it is definitely true that Germany has received a lot of criticism by its European and transatlantic allies for its, I'd say, policy of restraint when it came to the Libya campaign. And therefore, especially security experts within Germany have a strong feeling that now in Mali, we could prove to the world that we can make up for that and that we are not stealing our way out of our international responsibility.
But all of them, the United States, Germany, Britain, they've all pledged support by providing planes and training, but none of them, they were very firm about that. None of them are going to commit own troops. Is that something...
I don't know.
May I intervene at this point? Because, I mean, a lot of mistakes have been made in the last 8 months. And one of this is that a solution for Mali was delayed endlessly. And because nobody was really prepared to put money on the table to finance any African-led mission, as it was still called by the last UN resolution in December, an African-led international mission. But nobody wanted to put money on the table for this kind of intervention. So this was the main reason why a solution for Mali was endlessly delayed. And there was a lot of talk about the instruction aid for the Malian army. But it never really started. And of course, Malian people were getting more and more desperate because when Romani Prodi, as the SAL representative of the United Nations, said, well, we will come, but not before September of this year. Of course, this was like kicking Malian out of any kind of international solidarity. And therefore, I think the French intervention now is really based on a lot of failure of the international community.
Anyone care to jump in?
I think it may be helpful to look back at how did we get into this. It has been said several times that the French are there basically on an invitation of the Western African countries and of the Malian governments. De facto, we have to see and we have to understand that the French, not only traditionally and historically, but until today, have a strong interest not only in Western Africa, but also other parts of Africa. We have seen this in European military missions in Chad and in Congo. The French are the ones who are pushing for that. And not only Germany, but a number of other European allies are very restrained and careful and hesitant to get militarily engaged. Part of the reason is maybe they have a better understanding of the risk that are attached to any military engagement. I mean, we've discussed that earlier. Clausewitz teaches us that if you throw in your military weight, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. There are just too many factors that influence it and too many actors. And the same is true for the case now in Mali, and we have seen it on other occasions as well. And what the French are today, de facto, they are the guarantor of the might, of the power, of the reign of the Malian government.
But come on, I mean, saying that Germans are reluctant concerning military interventions in Africa because we are wiser and more aware of the risk, this is nonsense. We don't do it because we have no clue about these countries. It's because we have no traditional relationship with them. It's because they speak French and not German. And France has refused in a number of cases to send troops. When the Central African government asked them to protect basically the regime against rebels, France said no, we are not going to interfere in this. It's not that the French are intervening everywhere in Africa because it's their former colonial turf. There is, there are stakes for them, of course, but what happens? But Mali is basically not a civil war or just like, kind of a country in turmoil in which you would intervene. No, it is a country, it is a people that disagrees with the conquest of Ansar ad-Din. In the majority, I think, Charlotte, you agree with this, even though you're skeptical about this intervention. But the question is not to intervene. Would be a wise thing, or would prove that we are more aware of the risks. What I think we should talk about is the regional implications and the question how this would affect Algeria, how this would affect the neighboring countries. Okay, there are risks here, and the hostage crisis in Algeria proves that there is a lot of risk. But Marine Le Pen, and it's very painful for me to kind of have to say that in this way I agree with what she said, but she said like the intervention in Mali is kind of a direct consequence of the French intervention in Libya, because maybe without the Libyan regime of Colonel Gaddafi falling, the Ansar ad-Din and the rebels wouldn't be so heavily armed. And maybe this intervention in Libya was kind of catalyzed the war situation in Western Africa. But hey, does it mean that because they did one thing in Libya, they have to do the other thing in Mali? This is always the problem with a world power, and the French in that respect are world power.
I think there is no doubt that the intervention in Libya has somehow triggered the crisis in Mali, because there were a lot of weapons coming into Mali. And also, we should not forget that on the first hand, it was not so the Islamists who overtake the north of Mali. It were the so-called Tuareg rebels, which is a term I would like to rectify, because this is just a minority of the Tuareg. And it was also a kind of occupation at that time, because the Tuareg in northern Mali are a minority. So when a minority claims to force their will on a population, we usually call this occupation. So the crisis in Mali started with Tuareg coming from Libya with a lot of Libyan weapons, and they felt encouraged just because of the power of their weapons, so to take over the northern territory. And they did this partly together with Islamist forces. And then the Tuareg were kicked out by the Islamist forces themselves. So this was the starting point of this crisis. We should not forget this. And so now to say, well, because Germany was reluctant to participate in this Libyan intervention, now we should do it better, this would rather be entirely false conclusion.
We've talked a lot about what's going on right now on the ground. Let's seize the little remaining time that we have with a look ahead. What are we looking at here? Military analysts, for instance, Cornelius Vogt, are saying the fighting will have to end in 2 months because then heat and rain make combat in Mali impossible. Do you think this will all be done by March?
I don't think so. Part of the reason is it will be very difficult to get the African troops to where we want them to be. One reason that was already mentioned is the financial situation of those ECOWAS countries who are contributing, who are at least politically willing to contribute troops, but someone will also have to pay for them. The other thing is we will also have to train them. We have to enable them to bring about some concerted effort, that is some interoperable capability. That's one thing. The other thing is to simply bring them there. It's a matter of deployment. Those African countries themselves have very little capability for strategic airlift. That is something the Europeans or maybe even the Americans could help them with. Whether all of this is possible within the next 2 or 3 months, I'm not so sure. It's a very short time span. What I would rather want to focus on, we have talked a lot about sort of like the tit-tat that led to this situation that we have now. Not only the intervention, but also the difficult situation in advance, the political stalemate, the blockade in Bamako. I think there are some more root causes of this conflict. I wouldn't say that Libya was the trigger of this situation. I'd rather say it's the enabler. It's the enabler. The weapons have enabled the Tuareg and others to bring about the political change and the change of a military situation that they have been planning and wanting for years. So therefore, this is this was an enabler. Another enabler that is rarely mentioned so far is the constant pressure on Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula and other parts of Africa that the Americans, with their counter-terrorism strategy, are forcing on Al-Qaeda and other Islamist groups, and that has led to a situation that they are looking for other locations, that they may relocate to Mali, that they are welcome, that maybe now in Mali there's a chance to establish a new headquarters or a new territorial hold. We know that this hostage taking in Algeria is nothing completely new. We have had similar events in northern Mali for years now. We have a huge issue of not only drug smuggling, not only talking about cocaine, but also cigarettes. So all of these things contribute to a situation where I think Islamists and radical groups in Mali can gather resources. And the longer they are able to do that, the stronger they will get. And eventually, we cannot say to what that leads, whether it will lead to an entire region around northern Mali destabilize. We have seen similar things in Algeria. It has been mentioned that ECOWAS is very keen to bring about some more stability in Mali. But we have also seen resistance, for example, by Algeria, who is not part of ECOWAS and who is somewhat reluctant to accept the Nigerian role and the Nigerian lead in ECOWAS. I think the situation overall, not just in the region, but also including the European interests and the role that Europe could play in that conflict, I think it's an extremely complex and intrinsic situation, and it is, I think, a big gamble to say where we're going to be in 2 months or in 2 years. Complex indeed. Daniel Gerlach, how will this conflict play out?
Well, I don't know, but
in your opinion.
But my observation at the moment is that we have learned some lessons from this. And one of these lessons is that we, as Germany, the biggest European nation and the strongest economic force in Europe, should probably start to care about that part of the world, because we haven't so far. We have learned that the Libyan revolution and the crisis in Mali are somehow interconnected, even though these two countries don't share, politically, don't have a common border. But this part of the world is as you say, extremely complex, extremely difficult, but we should probably start to gather some solid information about it. We should study it, and we should, military intervention or not, but we should somehow get involved in that part of the world. I think there is a political, well, I don't say there is a political solution, but I think there is ways to seek a political solution, which is, as Charlotte mentioned, the Azawad, the so-called Tuareg rebels, which are not the same thing as Ansar ad-Din, which are not the same thing as Islamist rebels. And this was wrongfully reported in the beginning of the crisis, because then, it was just rebels and two of a kind. So I think there is a way of negotiation, and there is a way of dealing with these groups. One question is, would they take it seriously, and would they trust what the government of Mali is kind of submitting to them? Maybe some kind of autonomy? I don't know.
Charlotte Wiedemann, is there a political solution in Mali?
Well, there has to be one. I mean, Mali needs a renewed democracy which is sustainable and which implicates Malian society in solving the problems. I mean, so far, Malians have been almost entirely sidelined. I mean, Mali is not just the army, Mali is also a people and a society. And to solve the problem means, of course, to drive out the jihadist, really radical Islamists as far as possible. But it also means to solve, to engage in a dialogue with the Tuareg and with other people in the north. And it can only lead to a peace process. And I just have some objection against the claim that Germany has not been involved in Mali and we don't care about this. I mean, Germany has a very high esteem in Mali, and also we are very good, we are very well placed to support a peace and dialogue process.
Well, whether Germany gets involved or not, one thing's for certain, this conflict in Mali will go on for quite a bit of time. We will see how this plays out. We at Deutsche Welle, of course, will continue to follow the story. I want to thank my guests for sharing some insight into this conflict and look forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.